Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another panel on tabletop role-playing games. Today, we are talking about folklore in games, and we have quite a crew that I'd love to introduce you to. So I'm going to go clockwise here. That's a warning for you, Apollo. You're coming up first. And I'm going to tell them a little bit about how cool you are, and then I'm going to put you on the spot right away to tell me about some being from a folklore tradition that you're connected to that you just think is really cool and that people should know about. Okay? Are you ready?
Okay.
Apollo is an Irish TTRPG performer and pro GM, voice actor, and audio engineer. They have a degree in classics and philosophy and will make it their player's problem to decipher the random passages from the Iliad. Hello, Apollo. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello,
And
thank you
tell us
for
about a
having
cool
me.
little guy.
So, in the town that I grew up in, when I lived in Spain, there's like a local mermaid myth, and I think more people should have local mermaid myths. In like my county, we had two separate cities that were neighbor cities had parallel mer person myths, and that like folklore, and that was really fun.
Like competing, or like variant ones, or to one body of water?
I tried to research them, and it was difficult to find like when they both arrived. They may have both been like contemporary in when they originated, but just two cities had two people that got turned into mer people.
Oh, I think we're going to be hearing a lot of this when you get into folklore. Incredible. Okay, continuing around. W.H. Arthur is the designer and award-winning TTRPGs May You Fish in Interesting Times and Conviction. As a freelance game writer, he has worked for clients such as Onyx Path Publishing, Renegade Game Studios, Black Armada Games, and Angry Hamster Publishing, with a focus on urban fantasy and horror. He also regularly hosts jams online, including the popular 36-word RPG jam and, very relevant to us, the Folklore jam on Itch.io. So, hi, Arthur. Welcome.
Oh,
And could you tell us about some folkloric being?
so I don't know if I'm a bit generic talking about folk spirits because it's kind of like what you hear about most in Southeast Asian folklore. But yeah, I recently read about this story. That was written down is that there are some foxes who are reading books, and then the book is being like stolen by a jerk who is a human, and then they're putting pranks to get the books back from this human person, and it was quite fun. Like because they love books, they love reading. They're just nerds.
As a librarian, I feel a deep kinship with these folk. That's fantastic. Okay, thank you. Continuing around, Ross. Ross is the GM and editor at Blades of Mayari, which is a Filipino-Canadian-led actual play podcast inspired by pre-colonial Filipino mythology. He is also the director of Studio Casina on Twitch, where they highlight Asian talent in Asian-made TTRPGs, video games, media, and more. Hi, Ross.
Hey, everybody. Nice to be here.
And could you tell us about some folkloric being?
My little guy, yeah. Not a little guy, it's three little guys. There's a spirit, question mark, called the Kumakatok. If you are familiar with Pokemon lore, Absol is like the herald of destruction, but a lot of people say Absol is there to help warn people that some major catastrophe is coming. The Kumakatok are exactly that. There are three beings, an old man, a middle-aged man, and then a young girl who knock on your door. And people say if they knock on your door, someone's going to die. But there are stories of doors being knocked on during the Battle of Manila when the American, Spanish, and Filipino forces fought each other. So it's kind of this, are they here to help us, or are they here to, do they portend doom, or are they doom? And that's awesome.
Yeah. I love a harbinger.
Yeah.
Like, harbingers and psychopomps are like some of my favorite folkloric beings.
Psychopomps,
like,
yeah.
That's good soup.
Yeah, good soup for sure.
Okay, I'm like having to rein myself in here because I'm like, let's just talk about that. Okay, Abby. Hi, Abby. So Abby Yazzie is your local Indiginerd with a passion for horror and stories that have uniquely cultural focus. From vampires to Faerykind to dinosaurs and dark ages, your stories belong. She also focuses on cultural consultation involving Southwestern Indigenous groups and sensitivity reading. Hi, Abby.
Yet it is so good to be here. Oh my goodness, what a crowd. And for my little guy show and tell, if you've grown up in any Mexican household or any Mexican-American household, I'm sure you've heard of El Cucuy, La Llorona. My personal favorite little guy is the Duende. The Duende is a little elf or gnome-like creature within overall Mexican mythology, I guess. My grandma used to threaten that he would cut off my toenails if I didn't clip my nails or clip things and then give them to witches. But I'm sure everyone has a different story in their households. And overall, just in the Americas, Indigenous cultures and cultures impacted by that tend to tell stories of little people who take your shit. I am sure you could ask any Inuk person about their own little people or the people up in the Aurora Borealis that will take your shit, or your kids, depending on what happens. But we really are just like, man, fuck little guys who steal your things. Why are you doing that? I'm telling everyone about your shit.
I have a personal story about a duende, because there are
Oh my
duendes
God,
in
yes.
Filipino mythology as well.
Yeah,
maybe
we
a
both
time.
got fucked over by the Spanish.
Yeah,
Let's hear it.
Hell yeah. But we can save that story for later.
I want to hear the Duende story.
Duende story. I'll give you a Duende story for a Duende story.
We were explicitly mentioned. This could go super long.
No, it's okay. Sam can't tell us what to do.
I'll be super good. I was 2 years old. Apparently, I was playing in an area where they're duende in the backyard. They're angry, and I didn't eat. I wasn't eating for quite a long time. Lost a lot of weight. Went to an albulario. The doctors were like, "Oh, everything's fine." Went to an albulario, which is like a medicine person, medicine man, medicine woman. They're like, "Oh, there's a curse on you. Remove the curse." And I immediately started eating as the curse was removed. So that's my duende story. Yeah.
See, the worst thing with my duende story is that I was told if I let
Yeah.
my toes hang off the bed, they'd bite my toes off, and if I was a dirty little girl, but that was it. And then my grandma would actually wait at the end of the bed and grab your toes.
And grab the toes?
I'm scared.
Yeah.
She still does it with my niece. It's a tradition I hope to uphold when I'm that old.
And this reminds me so much of the Italian. So there's a kind of Italian witch called a jettatore, who's the one who does malocchio, the evil eye.
Yeah.
And it does stuff like that, like stops you from eating and things like that. And then it has to be removed as a curse. And I'm like, it's all connected.
Yeah.
Which perfectly lines us up for the next question. A segue. What is folklore? Because how is it different from something like an organized religion? Just a story that nobody really believes in, or something I made up right now? Where does folklore fit in this? And open to anyone who has some thoughts.
I'm gonna yap, and everyone can follow after me because I'm a number one yapper. When I think folklore, as someone who's not studied it academically but has grown up with it, seen things like the American Indian Act, which kept us from sharing our cultures for such a long time on a legal level. For me, folklore is how humans, we deal with the world in our own whimsical, funny ways. Because even back in Paleolithic times, when we were just divulging from Homo sapiens, from Homo erectus, and so on and so forth, we were telling stories. We were painting bison on the wall. We were setting up bear skulls so children could play fight it. When I think folklore, I think of these are the stories that we tell to not only keep ourselves from fear, but to keep the past alive and inform ourselves about the world, whether it is as simple as throwing salt over your shoulder to why we bless the horned lizard with water whenever we see him in Diné culture.
Cool. Yeah. There's I'm also not trained in. I'm not a trained folklorist or study it, but we engage with it in our podcast, and just like what was said earlier, we live in a folkloric world, so that comes from my own experience. Also cursed by little guys, so there's that. But Dr. Damiana Eugenio, who's a Filipina folklorist, famous in the analysis of Filipino folklore in particular, speaks to like there's no universally accepted definition of folklore. Rather, it's like knowledge that's handed down from generation to generation that depicts beliefs or lifestyles of ancestors of a chosen ethnic group. So what's cool is that she specifically says like folklore isn't just writing, it isn't just literature, it's like artifacts, they're riddles, they're songs, they're things that you say when you pass by liminal places, or like rules that you have. Like we tell our younger generation to like not point at empty spaces in a room because you have no idea who's standing there. Those are things like we are living those traditions, and all of that is also folklore, not just the stories that are being passed on. So
Yeah, I mean, from my background being like studying mythology in that sense, but growing up in a country in like Ireland, which is a very folklore heavy country, the practically in my mind, the way that I make the distinction is that mythology to me has always been related more to the sacred, the what's the word, teleological. That might be wrong, but it's like mythology is gods, creation myths. How did this mountain become a thing? And then folklore is more intimate, household, community based. Why did I lose a shoe? Ah, lad, goblin, puka, took it. Sorry, can't get it back. The gods won't help you, but damn, those little dudes will take your shoes. And that's always been like my rationale.
Yeah, I don't know if I can group like urban legends into folklore, or should we treat it as separate? So, I mean, in my games, I write about both like Hong Kong and Chinese folklore. I grew up in Hong Kong, so I've been like doing more research of Hong Kong folklore, and because Hong Kong is a relatively young city, so a lot of the urban legends is reflecting like the recent sort of from the mid 20th century to now, kind of like it reflects how the urban development of the city, and also the trauma from World War II on the deaths that have occurred during that time. Yeah, so it's very interesting. It reflects both tragedy and history of the place.
And I think the sort of the contrast with like the sacred too, because I think I'm Italian, and in the Italian tradition we have Catholicism obviously very present. They've got the whole like Pope there and stuff, and then but immediately under there's like all this folklore, and they kind of interact, but then also kind of have their own jurisdictions almost. The rules of being versus like that up there, that's God's business. This here, this is house business, and it's a bunch of little guys actually that we got to worry about in this. And I find that so fascinating, and I think if you try to kind of break them apart, and I'm sure academics trying to like categorize them neatly, you'll be dizzy forever. Because I think they always kind of bleed into each other. And I love the introduction of things like urban legend. I even think certain things like creepypasta or whatever can like those become folklore, right? Like those we create folklore as much as we interact with it from the past. Which brings me perfectly to my next question. Haha, see what I did there? So why though? Why do we do this? Because why do you think that folklore is so popular in fantasy role-playing games? Don't we just make up completely new stories from scratch? Why do we get so much joy out of drawing on these tales and incorporating them and remixing them? This is just an opinion, so whatever you think.
I mean, honestly, I think it has as much to do with why we do folklore in the first place as to why we bring it into our media, especially TTRPGs. Like, I know the reason why I'm like, yes, I'm making this Mexican. This comforts me. Yes, this is now. I'm making this Latino. It does not matter what it was beforehand because I'm informing it. But we look at folklore as the response to the world, whether that be trauma, that be history, that be a community saying, don't walk over the path that a coyote does because something bad happened to that guy one time, and that clearly must be a curse. As scientifically as we can look at it, it's also a comfort knowing that, sure, the little guy might steal your shoes, but if you lay out a bowl of cream for him, the little guy might not take your shoes. And ever since everyone started laying out bowls of cream, the little guy doesn't take your shoes. And we've just been doing it ever since. And if you look at like a lot of the influences, especially with early TTRPGs, things like George R. Tolkien, as I say George R. Tolkien as if George R. Martin, other white guy who wrote a big fantasy series. We're all informed by that, and it's only natural that we bring in the fantasy that we grew up with and the stories that we grew up with into the stories that we are telling. Stories beget stories.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I know a lot of Irish folklore stems from a lot of trauma responses. Folklore and for example, a lot of myths of changelings, that if you had a kid who died early after being born, they would say, oh, that was a changeling. Don't worry about that. A changeling, the fairies came, they took your child to the fairy world, he's growing up there, that's fine. What you've buried is a changeling. And there were specifically like changeling burials and stuff like that, because it's a way of accepting a loss of control in the world. But then for TTRPGs, from a meta-narrative perspective, folklore makes a world feel more lived in my mind. Because if your party goes to a town and it's just a town, it's a nice town, it's got a tavern, it's got a few buildings, it's got a mayor. But if then they say, oh yeah, and remember to put 3 gold coins under your pillow every night, or else your horse will get taken. That's like, oh, these people know what they're talking about. Clearly something happened. So it just creates like, oh, these communities are they're more their own thing. It feels, to me, it just makes things feel more lived in.
It's like a depth of the reality of the history there.
I mean, I guess in a certain sense, all fantasy is inspired by folklore. Yeah, and especially with like tabletop RPG and D&D, it draws a lot from Tolkien, and Tolkien basically drew a lot from the folklore to make all the fantasy races and fantasy monsters as well.
Yeah, one of the things I was... Oh, you go
please.
ahead. I've been yapping.
Well, what I was going to say is it's a nice shortcut for verisimilitude. It's like, it's hard to come up with culture, tradition, and history. You can have a generator do it, and you're like, I don't get it, and you now have to read thousands of words to understand it, or you're sitting there writing all of that, and your players will never engage with it. But just like the 3 coins under your pillow, or you pass by a well and you're supposed to throw flowers instead of coins, like that starts to provide questions that lead into potential quests, but also it shows that the world is lived in. And it's also a nice shortcut for my own personal representation in the world, like to know that there are duende or a swang, or like a different kind of minotaur that's more water buffalo-esque than kind of Spanish bull. All of that starts to make it so that this world that is not mine is suddenly a little bit more me. And I think we all want to be potentially heroes in our own stories, but also stories that reflect us as heroes. And that's just one shortcut to do that.
I like this idea too, as folklore is like the bridge between fantasy and reality, of like, verisimilitude is the word that you use, that like, imagine I said it right the first time and I'm saying it too. But like kind of creating that so it feels familiar enough that we can navigate it. We learn that there are rules, and like you guys brought up, so much of folklore is knowing the rules for being and existing safely in the world. And so it's like we can kind of add that bridge there. And I want to draw something from a comment we got in chat, which someone said, I have enjoyed playing Coyote and Crow RPG because it allowed me to delve into the folklore of my own culture. And I think that's really fascinating too, if you have people who, for any reason, but I mean, colonialism being a lot of them, have been alienated from their own culture.
That is literally why we started our podcast. Is everybody on Blades of Mayari lives in the diaspora, and we have varying levels of like familiarity with language, and we have some cultural touch points. But we used a setting book called The Islands of Sina Una, which was created, written, researched, illustrated by Filipinx folks from in the Philippines and around the world. And it gave us a platform to explore more of what it means, what being like Filipino means to us right now in this time, in this place, in this time of our life. And it also gave me a platform personally to like delve into the history, because I just kind of accepted it as, you know, our history is Spanish, and I realized that that's vehemently, absolutely incorrect. And this book and playing through those stories and investigating more has revealed a lot for myself. So yes, absolutely, I 100% relate to the crow, coyote and crow comment for sure.
For sure. Like, I mean, I'm biased. I'm gonna make everything Dinette. Like I said earlier, Coyote and Crow literally features a city called Coyote City, and that opens to all the stories that I was told growing up, the ones that I attended in ceremony. The reason why we put those into games is because, like, damn, we don't see people talk about our cultures in a way, or correctly, even. It almost feels like the reason behind folklore, tying the mythological into the reality and taking power in that stance. I can reclaim my story and tell it as my ancestors would have told it, and not just someone who's trying to sell something scary.
What a perfect setup for my next question. Blessings to you, because my next question is specifically about the intersection of folklore and colonialism. Often folklore stands the Irish. Yeah, okay, we got the span here. But like in opposition to, in contrast to, and what I guess what do you think about that? But also the times of like the stories and archetypes that get represented, and how do you think those interact with this sort of like homogenized colonial narrative that might dominate certain kinds of fiction, or stories that we tell each other?
I actually have a weird double perspective on things, because for most of my childhood, I grew up in Spain. And then from about halfway through my teen years, I moved permanently to Ireland after having like split the difference for a lot of it. And how colonialism impacted the local religion, mythology, and folklore of both countries from the perspective of, hey, in Spain, you were the colonizer, but you still shot yourself in the leg somehow? Because I come from a region in the north of Spain that has, we know the names and very short accounts of myths, of like folklore for very specific creatures. Like we had our own version of giants. We had some witch folk tales. We had the two mer people that I mentioned earlier. Almost exclusively, those stories are stories of condemnation. They are, you did something bad and you've been cursed to become this folkloric creature. And almost always as well, there's the element of, these stories very clearly were affected by the religious colonization of Christianity when it arrived. Because these stories are almost always, the curse was given to you by the Christian God. So the mermaid story from the town that I grew up in. It was about a girl who used to, it was a seaside town. It's a girl who loved to go out on the cliffs and sing. And she was rowdy. She disobeyed her mother. And then the mother one day says, since all you do is sing by the cliffs, may the Lord God strike you down and you become a fish. And she flings herself into the ocean and she becomes a mermaid so she can sing by the cliffs. So it's like, even in our own very small, I've only found like 2 accounts of this written down because it was only ever oral tradition. Because Spain was a very Catholic country. We had the Spanish Inquisition. They weren't flouting around this stuff. And my mother has stories of her father being like, "Oh yeah, that neighbor, that was a witch. Everyone just knew it." And then you have the Irish perspective of, again, Big JC being brought over here. See,
Oh, Big JC.
I'm just imagining a giant Jesus Christ like stomping into
MCJC. MCJC, he was out here. But with the arrival of Christianity in Ireland and the colonial structures that brought it over, all of Irish mythology and Irish indigenous original religion, like the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Airshí, all those like spirits and gods and creatures and monsters looked at Christianity looked at them, and a few centuries later we have some scholars that said, can we just write about them if we say that they were spirits and folktales and they live in the hills and they're definitely not gods, they were just sorcerers or something? So it's that sort of like, either you get crushed by your own colonial structures like in Spain, or in Ireland there was the compromise of, we'll just demote ourselves. We'll just get demoted down to being folktales, and that's how we'll survive. And that's just an interesting like interactions with colonial powers.
Exactly. I mean, I speak so much. I come from 2 cultures that were both directly impacted by Spanish invasion and Inquisition and Catholicism. La Llorona being the most famous, she is, look, sorry, Spain, but you did a lot of bad shit. La Llorona, like, not you. You brought Big JC into this chat. That's fine. And now we can talk about him and diss him.
I also like this because this would have been Baby Apollo doing it too.
Just holding hands with Big JC, SMH. But when you talk about La Llorona, you grow up with a few versions. For a lot of people, it was just a story that was come up with so that children wouldn't wander near the water. But when you look into it, there are versions of the story, a lot like Apollo said, that were being punished directly by the Christian God, almost like it's a message to the indigenous population, like, look what she did. That's you, and you should feel bad about being involved in all this. And of course, like the downputting of the local population. La Llorona, she said to have slept with a famous like conquistador, and then those babies didn't get baptized because they were baptized, and so on and so forth. And she's banned out of heaven, so she must drown her children. It's just one of those ways that colonialism can shape and morph it, taking stories that maybe a local population had to keep children away from the water into, you must be punished. This is what you do. And so long as you obey, things will be okay. And then there are other things to look at. It was a condemnation of sexuality, for one, like the indigenous woman seducing a man into the water and drowning him, fear the temptress, those Christian archetypes coming out. And yet in other ways, she's kind of empowering. She directly fights back. She's literally using the land against these invaders. And then you have like the movies that come out where she's terrorizing a white family, which weird, but okay, I'll take the win where I can get it. But so much of folklore can be changed by who's telling the story. And God, Apollo, you pretty much took all the words out of my mouth. But the way you said downgrading it and keeping it safe, it directly happened in the Southern Americas with when Christianity was pushed, they're just told, these are spirits. These are not your gods. These are spirits. And people are just like, okay, but we're going to keep worshiping them. And now we have things like Dios de Muertos, Day of the Dead, where though you could see so much of that tradition mix in with Catholicism. And it's just this strange hybrid of condemnation and praise. But it's alive and it's morphing constantly.
Yeah, when I think about colonialism and folklore, I think about power. Where does power lie? And when, especially with like Filipino like animism and the Muslim and Indian traditions that were existed before the colonial powers kind of came in, the way that the Spanish kind of used our folklore and mythology to both to unify Filipinos, one, by wooing them into Catholicism. So an example here is Apalaki is one of the many representations of the sun, a god of the sun, or is the spirit of the sun. Early Spanish writing mentions how the stories that we tell about Apalaki are really similar to this dude called Jesus Christ. Can I tell you more about the big JC?
Not the youth pastor hold, just play the guitar. You know who else would have done
You know
Let me play a little bit of Oasis, and then suddenly it's a Christian song. That was the switcheroo that was happening. So that's one way of using your power to like take over kind of stories. And then in Spanish also demonized the jungle, demonized the rural areas, so that they can drive Filipinos into urban areas to then tax them, give them last names, force them into church, etc. So an example of that is, depending on where you are in the Philippines, the Baybayin was equal to the village tribe leader, the Datu in some cases. The Baybayin was the spiritual leader, whereas the Datu was kind of the more pragmatic and war-oriented leader. And the two of them would lead together, with one not being more than the other. And when the Spanish heard that women were leading, they're like, nope, can't have that. So some mythology, some stories of Aswang, which are could detach their bodies, and they preyed on babies, and they were the spawns of Satan, so that it gave them the opportunity to then persecute the Baybayin, who were entirely women or female presenting folks. There's stories of Baybayin being thrown into crocodiles to be torn apart. But I think what's funny about both of these situations is that colonialism also misunderstands folklore, to the point where when the Baybayin were thrown into the crocodiles, they didn't know that crocodiles are psychopomps in various traditions in the Philippines. They were actually just empowering and ensuring that those stories and those spirits continued on. So I think that's like a beautiful kind of silver lining to it. But just to kind of summarize folklore and colonialism, the big question is who is in power and where is the power moving when those stories are being told.
So yeah, with my background, like when I'm in Hong Kong, we have our own like Chinese folklore and like our own urban legends. So for the most part, it wasn't, the folklore themselves aren't too much impacted by colonialism. But one thing interesting when I'm reading about like the urban legends in Hong Kong is that, oh, they want to put up like a new building, but they would disturb the spirit. But then there's the colonial government who say, oh, they need to go ahead and they need to like go ahead with the construction and like take the ground where there were like spirits laying there. And then the local workers are the one that kind of like got killed by the spirits. So then the government has to stop and like hired some priests, some like local priests, usually like from like Taoism, to kind of do an exorcism and cleanse the spirit before like the work can continue. And the other thing about like me growing up in Hong Kong is that even though I think it's probably like 10% of the population is Christian or something like that. But then a lot of the schools, especially like when we were still a British colony, lots of the schools are Christian schools. So maybe it's just me. I don't know how everyone is feeling it. But growing up, I definitely feel that the schools are portraying like the Christianity is more compatible with science, and that the local beliefs and other folk beliefs are kind of less compatible. So yeah, there's in a way lots of like even like more modern sciences are kind
They're
of
more like modern, maybe, that they're more like, this is how quote unquote civilized people live,
yes,
right?
yeah. The
Mhm,
modern
mhm.
idea of civility is used to kind of like minimize other voices and other stories
Totally.
and other belief
Or things
systems.
in that colonial mold.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, and if we talk about like with folklore, it's it's never fully homogenized. Like usually, and I mean I can't speak to other traditions, but for everyone I know, you ask 5 people about the same folktale, you'll get 5 slightly different versions, and then you go to the next town over, you'll get a radically different version, right? These kinds of stories, they are wisdom that is passed on in storytelling form from people, and so it doesn't have that sort of uniformity. It doesn't, and so that way people, it can often get like discarded because it doesn't work with Christianity, which has like a single dogma, sort of, and it doesn't work with the like sort of like the sort of modern scientific view where it's like there is one truth. It's always those kind of like spaces in between.
It's this
Which
moving,
brings
shifting, living thing.
which brings me to my next question: queerness. Because I think I see a lot of these themes reflected in the sort of movement towards like one way of being, and even in a lot of folkloric traditions, we have a lot more. You're talking about the representation of women or shapeshifters, or kind of like queer representation in folklore that might be suppressed at some point. So I wanted to ask, is that something that you've also noticed? And if so, what do you think is the connection there?
Oh, 1000%. Like when you think Navajo, which is the term that the US government uses to federally recognize my tribe, I'm sure there is one thing that comes to your mind in terms of folklore. That name is, yes, I know someone's home. He's so excited. We're not talking about dog folklore. You better get. But when we think that, you think, oh yeah, the big scary witch that shapeshifts that shall not be named. But I so rarely see people talking about the parts of our culture that do fuck around with gender, because there was a lot of that before colonization. We talked about, colonization fitting people into boxes. With Navajo culture, there is something within our creation myth, not necessarily folklore, but there's a spirit who was of both genders, both worlds, as people were coming up into the world. Nadale. As Natalie would kind of go between the men and the women as they were fighting and be like, hey, I get both of your stories. Forth, it could be seen as one of the earliest examples of non-binariness, queerness. But you never see that get brought up. No, it's the big scary monsters. It's the classic, noble savage coming forth, blowing corpse powder in your face. It's that scary thing you see on the road in the middle of the night in the desert because it's so unknowable. It's just so much more sensationalized rather than talking about the basis of that, quite literally, our creation story, the Denebahane.
Well, and I think that's just something I was like, what's more actually scary to people? A shapeshifter that eats people, or maybe just a non-binary person?
I know, exactly.
Like, what's the bigger threat?
Talk about cannibalism and incest and witchcraft, but non-binary.
Oh,
What washroom would they go into?
my social order.
My social order. Yeah.
And exactly, no, it threatens
Yeah.
that colonial order. It doesn't
Yeah.
fit along with the story.
Yeah, 100%.
I think an element of it is going back to that thing we said of, look, and this is a societal thing in general, when an oppressive power is putting the boot down on you, you have to adapt to survive. and you have to adapt to keep the elements that you have to try to hold on to as many elements as you can. Some things are going to end up slipping through the cracks. So with like Irish stories, and this is, we're starting to walk the line between what should be considered mythology and what should be considered folklore. It is 20 minutes to midnight. Don't start that conversation with me. I'm tired. However, one of the big culture heroes for Ireland is Cuchulainn. He was a dude. He was one of the main characters of our, like, I'm gonna say our Iliad. That's also gonna make people mad at me. It's fine. The Tán, the Cavalry of Cooley, but he's one of the main culture heroes. He's this legendary warrior favored by the goddess the Morrigan. He could turn his body inside out and go Hulk mode. He had a spear that exploded into barbs if it hit you. Great stuff. Gay as hell.
Love it.
But when you adapt, when the Society of Ireland became, like, you know, more not patriotic, it starts with a male. That's it, patriarchal. It's so late. I'm so sleepy.
Okay.
But when you start going into more patriarchal societies and then the stories get condensed down, it's like, okay, well, we can keep all the cool badass warrior elements. Let's keep his rival, who was his beloved best friend, who he loved like a brother. The lines are so blurred. And then other culture heroes, that were raised by, like, a sorceress and a warrior woman, and you're like, and they were roommates, you know. So, like, sometimes elements of queerness end up being sidelined so that they can survive in patriarchal societies and storytelling traditions. And then, like, centuries later, you're like, no, what was all that? Someone said something back there. I see it.
So yeah, there's a collection of Chinese folklore called the translation name is Strange Tales from a Chinese Studio. It was published in the 1700s. So it's such a famous book that, like, the folklore from within this collection has been retold again and again in, like, modern media. But, like, people pick and choose what stories to, like, not remake, to what's the word? To make into movies, make into TV shows.
To adapt.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's also like 12 minutes to midnight here. So yeah, the stories they adapt is kind of quite heteronormative. But when I go back to the original text, like, some stories are, like, very gay. So it's just how they discuss homosexuality. They discuss it, like, a matter of factly. So it was about this man who is in love with a folk spirit. She was also male, and how they're saying, oh, it's fine as long as this man also produce an heir for the family. So I mean, it's kind of like lots of, I don't know, when I read about other cultures, like, homosexuality is always there, but then certain, like, especially like middle class family, they just want, as long as they produce an heir, people don't care with whether they're bisexual, whether they're homosexual. So
it
lots
all
of
comes
that.
back to that.
Yeah,
this is how you're supposed to live. Like, that's like, this is the normal way to go.
And in the modern adaptation, they just erase those stories.
Yep.
So unrelated to this, it's so similar to, like, how in Rome it was like, you can be gay, just don't be the bottom. That's it. That's all I'm gonna say.
Listen, we can't talk about Italian folklore because I don't know what the fuck's going on. I could tell you some tales from my bisnonna that you'll be like, what? Those don't seem
Was it
to
really
align.
gay?
There are a lot of roommates. so this is like a thing that happened like in the 1800s. If you look up the White Marmarian flock, there's all these like female sculptors in marble who were operating in the United States, and they were like all just lesbians and like black. Some of them were black, and they were working in marble, which is like a very male dominated thing. And they all went to like Italy to live where they could live more openly. Which Italy, where it's like they're still on the fence about gay marriage, by the way, but they were very much like, it's fine, just don't do it in the church. That's how, anyway. It's a weird thing, okay? The Italians. Speaking of the Italians and the single dogma and then the multiple narratives, this is not about the Italians, but I do think it's interesting when we talk about storytelling traditions, right? A lot of storytelling traditions, there's one story that's being told by one author to the audience of the masses. We got novels, we got movies, and then we have tabletop role-playing games where it's a story that's being negotiated by a group and two will never come out the same way, right? It's taking that authority out of the storytelling in a way that feels so conducive to folklore. And so I'm sold. I want to include more folklore in my game at home, but I also know that tabletop role-playing games have a really long history of misrepresenting certain traditions. And I want to make sure that I can incorporate these stories without being an appropriative piece of shit. Do you guys have any thoughts on how I should do it?
Yeah. Lots there. It's funny. It's that same question about like, how do we talk about this or build on these stories without appropriating them is something that we talked about. Like being in the diaspora, sharing Filipino folklore and mythology, we were very nervous about doing that because we sit outside of that culture in lots of ways. So I guess like two things that from our experience has arose, and I'd love like opinions and thoughts on it. But I think generally when we do home games, because we do home games to test scenarios or mechanics or things of that nature. If it's for your home game, first off, thank you for considering other cultures and being curious and being interested. Like that is an incredible first step. So I'm with you. That's so cool. Second, if it's for your home game, like the standard rules of empathy and kindness apply, and you don't have to get it right. You know, like you can learn about it, find the right resources. Like if you are trying to include Filipino mythology for the first time in your home game, this might be the only place where your players engage with that. So it's cool to go find the right resources to learn about it so that you can represent those stories as well as you can. And there's lots of leeway to make mistakes because by doing that, you'll learn together. And that's cool. Like no shade, no problem. That's incredible. And I think that's going to end up telling really great stories. Now, if it's a show that's being consumed by the public for entertainment, I think there's different responsibilities that I'm sure that we can all speak to. I think one of the things that we really wanted to ensure was that we didn't want to represent Filipino mythology with a capital F and capital M. Like we aren't experts and we aren't the only source of that. The two things that we wanted to do was to ensure that we are inspired by that. So that's in our kind of elevator pitch. So like we are inspired by Filipino mythology. And as much as we can, we point to experts. We point to the communities that are still telling these stories. And if it is a deity or a monster or a tradition that is alive and well in a community, we try and stay away from it because that is a lived, real, today experience, not a story that we tell in a book in the library. So as much as we can, we try and avoid those because we don't represent that. I don't come from that community. I am not emboldened and uplifted by those communities to be their representative. So I try not to. But again, all of these are kind of like for public show consumption things. For your home game, go explore, tell stories, build on it. That's cool. Yeah, those are kind of our thoughts.
Yeah.
It was really, really damn good. I just want to say that.
Yeah. Being Irish on the internet is a weird experience because the experience of there's a level of animosity a lot of the times between Irish people living in Ireland and Irish Americans, because Irish Americans will say, I'm Irish American, and they will prioritize the Irish part, but then to everybody else, the part that is emphasized is the American part, because you're saying you are a couple centuries removed and you have never been to the land that you claim origin from. Do you have a claim to that heritage? Yes, you do. But just paying it lip service is doing everybody a disservice. So whenever people talk to me about like, hey, I want to use like Irish mythology and my stuff, I'm like, hell yeah, awesome. I'm going to give you a mountain of book recommendations by Irish authors. We're going to some of the great like compilations of folkloric tales. We're looking at those. We're reading, we're talking. I think just if you are fortunate enough to know somebody from the culture that you are being inspired from, talk to them. Ask them, hey, what's like the lived experience with these things? Because like a lot of things like banshees in Irish mythology, if I see one more banshee as like the big boss, I'm throwing hands. Banshees are harbingers. They're the harbinger archetype. They very rarely should be getting their hands dirty, per se, even in a story. They should be there to let you know something's about to go down. So it's like, talk to the people that are from the culture, read books from the people that are from the culture, and then the most important part, because TTRPGs are an adaptation of all the source material that you're bringing together, not just folklore, you say, now that I understand this, how do I make it my own in a way that is respectful and not a mockery?
Exactly. You guys talk about like, living cultures, being a part of those living cultures. And honestly, researching whether it is for your AP, which really you should be hiring people who are a part of those cultures who have studied that. If we were going to put that content on the internet, because that culture deserves its right to be represented properly and told properly. And especially that, I think it's so important that we're specifying not experts, not the definitive. But like, if it's your home game, anything else, Google is there. You have this amazing online resource. That's one thing I love about being online, is that it connects you to so many people who will write about their things. Like, for instance, I want to include the spirit of hunger from Algonquian culture in my game. Is that okay? Literally, just type in the name of it. Is it okay? And I can assure you there's probably one or two Indigenous authors from Algonquian cultures who are going to tell you no and why it's probably not a good idea. And like with TTRPGs being a way to explore identity, to tell stories, there are ways to explore your own stories too. Because, for instance, if we're talking about American things, like Apollo said, when I was helping a friend write her Fallout TTRPGs, is like, so this book uses the spirit that we're not going to use the name of. What's a good alternative? I'm like, well, looking at American culture, have you heard about the fearsome critters, which were a thing that loggers from American culture would make up to scare newbies? They were probably inspired by both myth and things that they heard, but it became its own little subculture of just, here are the monsters that American loggers went up against. And they took that and ran so far with it. It's also a great way to get into your own culture. For instance, like those Irish Americans. Read those resources that are given to you. Read about things from that country. If you want to learn about more Native things, you want to have Native American inspired things. There is no such thing as Native American inspired. There are tribes. Look up your local tribe chapter. How did this story? What's the name of your town? What does it mean? It is around you. There are just people who are willing to answer your questions. Just look around, put a little effort in, and it will come and show.
I mean, I'm going to take one step further, and it is also like more from a creator's perspective, is that like there are lots of interesting folklore from your own culture. So that's one of the reasons why I'm running Folklore Jam, or one of the rules of the Folklore Jam is to use folklore from your own culture or a place you belong. Because yeah, like there's interesting folklore everywhere. I mean, I get like one weird commenter who told me, oh, how come it's so restrictive? I don't have anything to use, but it's definitely not true. But he's probably because like I've got like lots of whiter friends. I mean, I live in the UK, lots of whiter friends, and they can dig up like so much interesting folklore in the UK, and yeah, and it's amazing. And I mean, that's what, as I was saying earlier, that's what kind of like Tolkien do. He took a lot of the folklore and make it into Lord of the Rings and Hobbits and other books. Yeah, so yeah, there's so much folklore from your own culture you can use, and you don't have to like always borrow from other cultures.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do is I have an idea for an encounter or something, and then I just ask my parents, like, "Hey, did you ever run into something like this situation?" And a lot of times they're like, "Oh yeah, that sounds like this monster." I'm like, "Well, what is that? Like, tell me about that." Oh yeah, your uncle dealt with that. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, because just like how folklore is a way to bridge fantasy and reality, it's a way to bridge now and then. So why not engage or try to discover more about the similarities and analogous kind of stories that seem to pepper stories from all over the world. And I think that's one of the really cool parts about folklore. Like, there are giants everywhere, but all of them are a little bit different. There are mermaids everywhere. But they're a little bit different. And I think that's what makes it really cool. And that brings us back to that verisimilitude thought of like, makes it a little bit more real as well.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize one thing that was kind of brought up a few times, which is that folklore is everywhere. It is wherever you live, your town where you live, there is folklore about that town. That has developed there. Your high school that you went to, there was probably folklore that developed in your high school. Whatever your culture of origin is, there's folklore there too. And so it's somewhere you can use to explore your own history, the history of the place where you live, where you are currently, as well as learning from other cultures and reaching out there. And I also want to say something, and this one is specifically for the white people in chat because I think this is something that we often struggle with. Some traditions are closed, meaning that they're just not for you. And they will not that's okay. Don't worry, there's no shortage of folklore. There is plenty of folklore that is open, that you can learn from if you come with, like you said, that empathy, that respect, and that it's okay that some of it's a no-go zone, and that's part of the respect things.
Yeah, for every forbidden spirit from an indigenous culture of the Americas, there's something from, like, ask your Irish grandma about, like, stories from the old land, or do some research. For every forbidden spirit, there's a leshy or a little dude from your country who's going to steal your shoes.
Or even from the same tradition, there might be part of it that is open, that is happy to be shared.
Exactly. Little
Exactly.
people.
Fantastic.
To the thing that you said of like every town has folklore, I literally just went, doesn't my town have a famous witch? And I was like, yeah, we do. That's wild. No further questions.
Yeah,
Every
that's a
town
practice everyone should do. Look up what your town's folklore is. I just looked right up. We have something called the skunk ape, the Arizona
Okay.
skunk ape.
This is going to be the first panel that ends with me assigning homework to the audience, which is to learn a piece of folklore from your own town. And believe it or not, friends, that does bring us to the hour. So we're going to do a quick round of sign-offs. If you could tell us who you are, where we can find you on the internet, and what you're up to. And this time I'm going to go in the opposite order of last time. So we're going to start with Abby.
Oh my gosh, little old me. Well, yeah, hey, I was Abby. It was such an honor to be on a channel with so many brilliant minds. Oh my god. Seriously, I came away with so many insights from what you guys had to say. But if you want to see more of me, you can find me on most places on the internet at Enough of Abby, where I'm doing cultural consultations, I'm doing sensitivity readings, and more importantly, I'm telling diverse stories where you belong. You can check me out on Rolling Nomads, where we're working on an all-Latino or majority Latino story with vampires and tales of immigration in Phoenix, as well as on Dubious Creatures Presents, where we're telling a story of Southwestern vampire hunters. And I get very auntie in that. I'm so Navajo. It's ridiculous. I'm pulling out white ash. I'm swearing people out. It's cha. But hagone, folks.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Ross, where can we find you and what are you up to?
Yeah. Hello again. My name is Ross. My pronouns are he, him. You can find me at Blades of Mayari. We are a Filipino-Canadian-led actual play podcast inspired by pre-colonial Filipino mythology. You can also find me on Twitch at Studio Kusina, where we play cool games either with an Asian cast or Asian created media. You can also find me, I'll plug it, I suppose. Next Monday on Game Master Monday, there's a new episode that is coming out called where we play the game Nighthawks. But it's a situation where Halloween keeps playing over and over again, and we are stuck in a diner dealing with what it means to be stuck in a diner with Halloween repeating. It's great. There were lots of tears, which was a surprise. It's a fantastic game. Also was recently on Help Action Needed, where we played Pantheon. If you're interested in mythology and you're like, I'm still not really sure how to engage with folklore and mythology, play Pantheon. You make up a god and a major god, a minor god, and a champion, and then you roll a dice to see who's telling that story. And it's fantastic. It is a fantastic system. But yeah, those are the two that come to mind of where you can find me.
All right. Thank you so much. And Arthur.
So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me here. It was really nice talking to you all. I can mostly be found on Blue Sky. It's wharthur.bluesky.social. So I've also got an itch. I don't know if it's if it's mirrored on your side as well, or just mirrored on my own side. So it's awowether.h.io. So currently I'm running Folklore Jam. So it runs from 1st to 31st of October. So you should, if you are a designer, you should really go and join it, or like check out the entries from, you can check out the entries this year, but also like there are lots of great entries from the previous years as well. And talking about Folklore Jam, I make Mugwell's Estate. It's a game I make for Folklore Jam last year. It's inspired by Hong Kong urban legends, and I'm doing a Kickstarter. So I'm doing a Kickstarter. It will have a new cover. It will have extra content, and it will go live in November. Yeah. Thank you.
Amazing, and how topical. And then we have Apollo.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for having me. My name is Apollo. You can find me on the internet at Tall Nerd Apollo. I do cosplay when I have time. I do voice acting when I remember. And I do TTRPG performances very often. In fact, oh Jesus, I spat all over my mouth. I'm going to bed. All of our mic. Tomorrow. So tomorrow, which is technically today for me, but who cares? Stay with me. Over on Tino Tales, DM by the incredible Chris. Oh, love that man. We start playing a Tales of the Valiant mini campaign called Ascension, where this character, okay, Victor Mel Jace Talus, love child, savior complex, put in a workshop tower for like 30 years. That's the energy. We're doing full Hunchback of Notre Dame. And then on Sunday, I'll be playing my evil Dilf Dragonborn over at Madaloon's Table over at Chains of Asmodeus, and so many other places. Keep an eye out on the socials. Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, joy, and honor.
Thank you all so much for joining. I am Anne. I'm a tabletop role-playing game creator, actual play producer, and general goblin from the internet. And goblin in a fairy way, not in a Tolkien way. And huge shout out to our producer, Sam, without whom none of these panels would happen. This is all Sam's doing secretly. And if you have been enjoying these panels, please consider supporting us on Patreon at All My Friends Are Stories, so we can do more and have more fascinating people tell us fascinating tales from fascinating traditions. And on that note, I wish everyone a very good night's rest. All right, goodbye.